Hi, it's Rachel. Welcome back for another book talk. Just want to warn you for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be doing a special series of book talks that's going to honor YALSA and ALA's 2020. I'm going to just show you what it looks like. Excellence in Young Adult Nonfiction. So this is the medal. Finalists. There are 5 books that were chosen as a finalist, much like the Morris, which we did a book talk on. And I quickly learned from that book talk that it's much better to break these up than cramming 5 books into a book talk. So I've decided to do 2 books for each book talk, and then at the end I will talk about the winner. But each of these books of nonfiction were selected by librarians who are a member of YALSA. For those who are unfamiliar, YALSA is a division of the American Library Association. It's for Young Adult Library Services Association. And people work all year reading all nonfiction for young adults and selecting the best of the best. And I can tell you, as someone who has read them all, these are awesome. And they are filled with back matter. In fact, I was able to attend the reception, and I loved the shirts the committee wore because it said on the back, it's all about the back matter. And they're very well researched, and they're very wonderful. And so my difficulty was deciding on how to pair up the books. And 3 of them had to do with World War II. But I was very lucky in that 2 of the books actually have to do with individuals that are from Russia or the Soviet Union. And so I have decided to start off with those 2 books. And I hope that you enjoy the book talks. If you are not a nonfiction fan, I'm going to tell you this is where you start. These books are written like a story. They're engaging, they're inviting, there is dialogue. And the fabulous thing about it is that these are real people. And as I always say, your story is important, and so are the stories of other people. And I was absolutely riveted by all of these books. So, without further ado, I'm going to start off with, whoops. Okay, now don't laugh at me because I got notes here so I don't mispronounce some of these Russian names. And I'm just going to go off right off the bat and apologize if you are Russian and have Russian lineage. If I mispronounce these names, I'm trying very, very hard, but I do not know Russian. And the first book I'm going to start off with is Elizabeth Wein's 1,000 Sisters. And 1,000 Sisters is the heroic Airwomen of the Soviet Union in World War II. What I actually appreciate about this is in some ways that she doesn't call night witches. And some of you may have heard of that term. This was actually given to the airwomen in the Soviet Union during World War II by the Germans because of the planes that they used. Now, there were different kinds of planes that they used, but one of them, which had an open cockpit, can you imagine an open cockpit flying in this? In the winter, in the elements. All right, these are some tough individuals. But because of this, they had to fly low, and they were slower planes, which meant that, of course, they were going to be in danger. And they'd have to cut their engines when they were coming close. Now, the Germans did not have radar that was as developed as the Soviet Union or the Allies. And so they would use searchlights. So what would happen is the airwomen would cut their engines, okay, and their airplanes, and when they were getting close to where they were going to drop their bombs. And so it was just coasting really low. But the Germans would sometimes hear just like the wind, right, in the wings. And they quickly caught on once the German fighter pilots were shooting them that there were women flying in the aircraft, which of course was not happening in Germany. And they said they sounded like witches that were coming in, like on a broomstick, because it was so quiet. So they dubbed them night witches because they were also excellent at what they did. So just a little background for you about why, if you've heard of that term, why they were called to that. Now, this book, I have to tell you, remember I told you, it's all about the back matter, okay? Elizabeth Wein gives you extraordinary back matter, okay, in this book. And although this really focuses on the women in the Air Force for the Soviet Union, she just pulled out a little bit to give you a picture of what's happening with other women who are aviators in other parts of the world, and what they were not or were able to do during the war effort. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out is that she does point out, she talks a little bit about leading up to this. And she talks about it from the point of view of Marina Ruskovoy. And she is the woman that is centered here on this page. And I do love this picture too that I want to show you. It's absolutely beautiful. And this is Marina, let me see if I can get this straighter. There we go. This is Marina Ruskovoy with her daughter, Tanya. And she was a mother, and she was also a pilot. She was also an aviation instructor, and she also was one of 3 women who first made the longest trip on record in miles successfully. And at the time that Marina was born, she was born into communist Russia, well, the Soviet Union. It was at the time of Lenin, and then later, of course, Stalin. And it's really a very frank and open look at what life was like under Stalin. And it is frightening. But one of the things that Wein does illustrate is how communism did give women a little bit more equality than what was happening in the rest of the world. Because under communist rule, although, she clearly shows people are starving, you could be grabbed for no reason and then never heard from again, whether you were a man or a woman. And you could fall under suspicion if someone in your family, of course, said something against Stalin. So it wasn't, like, hey, communism. But because of communist principles, women were expected, yes, you are a mother, but you go out and work. You were expected to have equal treatment, equal pay. And so there were also these clubs, okay? And people were encouraged to be in the clubs. And by that, if you weren't in a club, you were kind of considered, are you really playing on the right team? And some of these clubs were, of course, aviation, which is how Marina herself became involved in aviation. She was initially a musician. Then she had her damaged vocal cords. And that was a dream she had to give up. But she became a flyer instead. And one of the things, too, under communist rule is that women were brought up to believe that they would also fight for the motherland, just like men would. And so when the war broke out at that time, okay, so, and I wrote this down to make sure I got this correct, Ms. Wein, okay, because I wanted to make sure I got it correct. In 1941, almost a third of the Soviet pilots were women. Vastly different than everywhere else in the world. Like, we had Amelia Earhart, right? One woman, right? I mean, I'm not saying that she was the only one flying, but she was big news because she's a woman, right? This is not unusual in the Soviet Union, and a lot of that was due to the Communist Party. So there was that benefit. And so part of the reason why you have so many aviation women pilots that are fighting in World War II is due to Marina Ruskovoy. She is a national hero because of this flight that she took, right? And she's won high honors. And so they don't really know exactly how it happened. And Wein makes that clear. But somehow she meets with Stalin, and there are 3 regiments that are formed of women. We're not just talking pilots, okay? We're talking navigators, because Marina herself started off as a navigator. We're talking ground crew. We're talking women that are doing the upper body physical strength that is needed that men are typically doing. And they are training and taking part in the war. Now, women were eager to join. And due to Marina's efforts, they did. So she had 3 different regiments. She took charge as commander of one of them, and she appointed 2 others. And one of them that I want to bring up was a very reluctant commander, and I am so afraid I'm going to butcher her name. Okay, but her name is, I'm looking at my notes. Okay, Yuvida, Yevdovaya, okay, Burshanovskaya. And I'm going to show you a picture of her, so then you can see her name, and you can look her up later if you would like, okay? I find this woman to just be brilliant, because she is also the one commander that survived throughout the entire thing. Like, she brought her girls together, and they survived. And she was like, really, I don't want this job. And I have to be honest, I think this would probably have been me during the war as well. So this is her right here, and you can see her name. Okay, so you can Google that if you want. Even better, buy the book, okay, or check it out from your library. So this is her right here, okay, and she's put in charge, and she's like, I'm not a leader, but she accepted it, because this is what you do in a communist country, and also when you are in the military, you accept those positions. And she was just a strong individual. I don't want to just say woman, but just a strong individual, because these women were doing the same work as men. And get this, because again, communist country, they were not given clothes that were tailored for them. They were given they were given male underwear, they were given male boots. They did not have boots that were tailored for them. They'd have to stuff it, like, with cloth or whatever to make it fit. I mean, they could go in the brig if they tried to make their own underwear to make, a little feminine. I mean, this was hard stuff, yet they persevered. Another individual I like to talk about, and she's on the cover right here. This is Lilia, okay, Litvayak. And she was a fighter pilot, okay? She was an ace. In fact, newspapers in the United States wrote about her. Obviously, they wrote about Marina as well. But she was so, she'd been wounded many times and still was staying up there fighting. It would sometimes just be her plane and 40 of the Germans. That was her. And one of the things, too, I appreciate that Wein writes about is she has a whole chapter on here about fear. All of the women said, of course we felt fear. Like every time we went up, every time we came back down. But it was something that we had to do. And so I don't want to describe her as fearless. Yet there were times where she had served not just with the women regiment, because she sometimes bucked heads with her commanders. She was not with Marina, but with a different regiment. And because nobody really bucked heads with Marina. They considered her like their mother. But she was sometimes with all male regiments, and she'd be the only woman. And they trusted her implicitly. Sometimes she was the wingman for the commanders, and she was also given leave, and I forget the terminology, to basically do what you want. Like, you can go and invade, you can go and scout your own missions, because she was that good. And so she was pretty darn amazing. But one of the things that I want to point out about this entire experience is that a lot of times we only hear like one aspect of what's going on with a particular mode of government, like with communism. And I remember hearing about the Night Witches, but not really knowing much about them. And what I really loved about the scenes and the details in this is that Elizabeth Wein herself has her pilot license, and it really does come alive because she knows what she is talking about. And she mentions as well in the back matter of the book and her acknowledgments that she had the opportunity to go and visit and go to Russia and see what was left of, I think there was like 1 or 2 planes that were left that had been flown. And there is this sense when you read the book of being there. And that is an incredible experience to have. But, you know, when I was growing up, it was still during the Cold War. I know I'm dating myself here. But there was only one aspect of communism that I saw, which is negative. And seeing this and understanding about the gender equity was really enlightening. And especially at the end, you see the women together. And I love that it's called A Thousand Sisters because you feel the relationships between these women. And I imagine it's much the same for men in combat. And although there is not much mention of the men that fought with the women, there was a great camaraderie between them. And I feel like that happens a lot during times of duress like this, during times of war. They become your family. And what ended up happening too when the war was over is the women were not allowed to stay in the military. They were told they had to kind of sign non-disclosure agreements, basically to state that they could not talk about their war effort, like that they did anything even. So their contributions were, even though they'd been awarded some of them the highest honors in the land, it was sort of like, and we don't want you flying anymore. Some of them still were able to be, you know, trainers in aviation, but many of them, you know, went on. They were engineers and other things. What I found very interesting is Wein ends by discussing this, and I also wrote this down so I didn't get this incorrect, that today 5% of all commercial flights in the world, okay, only 5% of those pilots are women. So I want to take that in comparison, and again, it's not an equal comparison, but consider that at the time, in 1941, a third of all pilots in the Soviet Union were women. It's almost like we took a step back in how we're thinking. And that 12% of the student women, the student pilots in the United States are women. And it was a struggle then for women, but it's still very much a male-dominated industry. And to me, it's quite fascinating because it's clear in this book that without these women, there's no way that the Soviet Union would have been as successful as it was. And it's clear, too, that these women were incredible warriors and incredible soldiers for their country. So if you have any kind of interest in war and looking at the very great descriptive scenes of aviation battles, and you're interested in aviation, if you're interested in what does it mean to be a woman and fight alongside men in combat and all of those sorts of things, this is definitely a book I would recommend. Even if you're not interested in any of that, because I am not a pilot, I have no interest in going to war, I was gripped. These women were just incredible. And they were respected, highly respected. In fact, they were called by many of the men that they worked with little sisters. And some of them were 16, 17 years old when they went off to war. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, their accomplishments, and definitely worthy of your time. So the next book I'd like to talk about that was a finalist is the first one I showed you that had the medal on it. Not all of them got medals. I also want to thank the publishers. I should thank the publishers because I received these books for free when I went to the conference, the ALA conference at Midwinter. And look, I got mine signed by Miss Wein. Isn't she fabulous? I appreciate that. And so this is from Balzer and Bray, division of HarperCollins. Thank you very much for providing me with this. I appreciate that. And the next one that I have here is thanks to... and Lynn Curlee, who wrote this, was not available to be there. But this is from Charles Bridge. And trying to think who Charles Bridge is a division of, and I'm blanking. See, librarians don't know everything. We have to look it up. And I'm not seeing who Charles Bridge Publishing is a division of. Okay, but I'm giving them credit. Thank you for this beautiful book, and it is beautiful. Lynn Curlee wrote and illustrated this, and he writes in his back matter, which is lovely. There's, besides having an index and a bibliography and sources, he also explains the paintings. And I want you to note this is one of his paintings right here in the front. Take a look. I'm not hiding it too high. Oh, there we go. So this is Mr. Curlee, and when he's younger in the 70s, and he first became enamored of Václav Nijinsky, who this book is about. And he began a series of paintings. All of the paintings that you see in this book are full size, because you see how small he is in comparison to the paintings. So keep that in mind when you look at this book. These are monster-sized paintings. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. So when he decided to focus and do an actual book on this, he painted more, along with others that he had painted in the past. So, without further ado, Lynn Curlee's The Great Nijinsky, God of Dance. I have to tell you, I had never heard of Václav Nijinsky, who was born in the Ukraine, in Kiev. I like ballet. I mean, I'm not going to say I know everything about ballet, because clearly I did not know about this incredible and phenomenal individual and dancer who is still considered to be, like, he was called the God of Dance. The God of Dance. How could I not know about this person? And I didn't. And he helped to design some of these costumes. What you see here is actually like representational of some of the costumes, even though this is a highly stylized painting that he helped design. He helped to create some of the most beautiful and original pieces of ballet. So without further ado, I want to let you know, he was born in the late 1800s, in 1889, as I mentioned, in the Ukraine, at the time, Russia. He was born in a family of dancers. His father, however, I'm not going to tell too much, but his father had abandoned them. But from a very young age, he was trained to dance, as was his sister. And he was short in stature, which isn't something that normally in ballet, like, they want someone that's extremely short for a man. You don't want someone too tall. But he was sort of made fun of. And let me show you, I have a photograph of him when he was young. Look at this. Isn't he handsome? I think he's handsome. I just had to stop there and show that. But here he is. This is when he was a ballet student in 1906. I love this. I do. I just love this. And the book is just beautifully laid out. There are times too where they show, like in the debut, what it would look like as a playbill. Isn't this fantastic? I know. I'm sorry. I just love the layout of this book. I think it's just a piece of art. But here he is when he is young, okay, when he first enters ballet school. And he's got very Slavic features, which is not something I would normally point out, but it is pointed out in the book because he did not look like what they wanted him to look like. This was very, very important, apparently, when he attended ballet school. He didn't look right. He didn't have the right facial features, and the physique, all of those things mattered. And so this was something that he was given a hard time about. However, he was accepted because his father was known. Even though he had abandoned the family, everyone knew who his father was. And his father was known to be this incredible, incredible jumper. The leaps that he could make were just, like, phenomenal. And so they were like, well, maybe he passed this on to his son. Well, guess what? Apparently he did. But I'm also going to attribute this to hard work as well. And so this is one of the things that he is known for. He had an incredible physique. And so a lot of people would say, well, you know, he's not much to look at. And he's kind of quiet. But boy, he is strong. Like, strong. He would do things in ballet that hadn't been done before. So, for example, he would partner two female dancers, and he would be able to lift them both. I can lift 2 books. I mean, you know, that to me is impressive. But he would create and do things that they had never seen before. And at the time, he also was noticed for his body. Okay, and this was not a known in Russia at the time. So this is still Russia. This is not Soviet Union. And so he was picked as a companion, okay, by a local prince. Now, homosexuality bisexuality, those sorts of things, they were known of. They, especially amongst those of the higher tier, like you would keep a consort, they weren't necessarily discussed openly, but certainly being a kept person wasn't something that was unheard of. And so it was highly encouraged because Nijinsky came from a very poor family, a family that was starving. So by accepting this, he was able to help support his family. Nijinsky himself was bisexual. At least that is what he eventually stated. But he, I think, was a man that also took advantage, at least at this time period when he was a consort, in trying to care for his family. And I think it's important to note, too, in Russia at this time, as a person who was born and the level he was born in, that you didn't have much opportunities. One of the things Curlee talks about, too, in the last chapter is how he is a legend. And in many ways, he is an icon for a lot of people in the LGBTQ movement. Part of the reason for that is he eventually gets accepted, or is noticed, I should say, by a man named Sergei. This is me looking at my Russian notes. Sergei Diaghilev. And Sergei Diaghilev was also a very wealthy man. This is how I imagine him. I'm trying to see if I have a picture of him in here. I think I do. But Sergei was the son of a very wealthy family who really encouraged him to do something with your life. Now, if you're a parent or you just have friends that have been there and done that, and you've heard their parents say, go do something. And they're like, nah, man, I'm cool chilling in the basement. This was Sergei. He was really not in the mood to go and do something with his life. However, he was a huge fan. Here he is. He was a huge fan of the arts. Okay. And that was what he liked. Well, there's really not a job there for him. But he decided he would use his money, or rather his parents' money at that time, to invest in starting something to do with the arts. So what he founded and created is the Ballet Russe. And the Ballet Russe was this very elite and prestigious ballet company. It's a French name, and forgive me if I'm also speaking French wrong. There's a lot of these books where I'm going to have to try and speak different languages, but I am trying. And so the Ballet Russe premiered and mostly did productions in France because he saw Paris at that time was definitely the capital of art. Okay, and so this is where you would go. And so he saw this young Nijinsky, and he thought, I need this dancer. So he basically kind of traded. He went to the prince who was having him as his consort and said, can I have him as my consort? So basically he got traded like a piece of luggage to Sergei. So he's a kept man now of Sergei, but also going to perform in the Ballet Russe. And this Nijinsky, really what he loved was dance. And many people who met him in real life said, especially around Sergei, who was, this man, this boisterous man, this man who loved to party, talkative, he drank, he played cards, and Nijinsky was quiet. He was very quiet. They found him to be very boring. They did not understand what Sergei saw in him, why they were in love, and they did live openly as a couple in France, but they did not understand it. But the thing was, they said, but when you saw Václav Nijinsky on stage, he was brilliant. So in his opening performance, I can imagine it. The way it's described in this book, you just have to see it. Read it, because I felt like I saw it. But they basically said he takes this leap from the stage into the audience, right? This tremendous leap. And it's like he disappears. There were no trick wires, nothing. It was just this tremendous leap. And to this day, many people in ballet say nobody could do what he did. And unfortunately, none of this is captured on film. Film wasn't around during the time when he was doing ballet. By the time that it was, Sergei had forbidden any of the performances to be filmed. But all of the people who danced with him said there were no tricks. This was just Nijinsky. And people were in awe. And he'd come out in these costumes. So you saw the one on the first cover. He'd come out in these costumes. I'm trying to find another one. That were just like interesting. So here he is actually with his sister in a performance, and he's barely wearing anything. And they said he would be so sensual. You couldn't keep your eyes off of him. And normally it was always the woman that would captivate in ballet, but not so with Nijinsky. Now, one of the things that I will say, I won't go too further because I want you to read the book, but Nijinsky had a very short life. Him and Sergei ended up breaking up, and I won't tell you the reason behind that because you can find out. But Sergei was very angry and actually kicked him out of the Ballet Russe. And he had a short career as a ballet dancer, and he was plagued with mental health problems. There's so much about him that is fascinating. To me, one of the most fascinating things is that I had never heard of him. This is a man that many people in dance have said have radically changed the scene, radically changed how dance was done, how it was choreographed, because Nijinsky ended up choreographing so many pieces, and most of it, not all of it, is lost. Sergei is partially to blame for some of that. Yet he still has this loud, resounding impact in the dance world, in the art world. And I was thrilled to be able to read this, to discover somebody, as somebody who has mental health issues. I suffer from depression and anxiety. And it's something that I work through and live through. And to see this artist being able to express himself, and in many ways at that time, people not understanding some of the things that he was going through. He did have a family. Yet so many of them, the option is, well, we're just going to lock you up. Yet the impact that he had on people, it's so very clear. Many times saved his life. Later in life, because he had this lasting impression. And I find reading a book like this, and by the way, it is a short book. This is like, it's a short book. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But reading something like this about an individual and understanding where they're coming from, I think is of such value, especially when you realize how much of an impact they have on what you see today. I recommend this book highly to people who love art, for people who are fascinated by dance. If you are a dancer, or if you just are a dance appreciator, if you love theater, this is the book for you. I think it's also a book for people who themselves may, if you're interested in mental health and what happened to people, and how that was interpreted. There really wasn't much support, and it's still something that I think we as people who have mental health concerns go through. And this wasn't that long ago. He ended up passing away in 1961, and spent a great deal of his life suffering with this without any understanding from others. And it is a shame. It is a shame that I, and maybe many other people, never knew his name, and yet he is known as the God of Dance. So read about him. I hope that one of these books intrigues you. Again, there is a reason why they were the finalists in nonfiction. And if nonfiction is your jam, these are the books. So by all means, if you don't want to purchase it, go to your library, check them out. They're sure to have them. And again, these were 2 of the finalists for YALSA's Excellence in Nonfiction for young adults. Highly recommend. These are usually books that are recommended for individuals in 9th grade and above. And I would concur with that, but I think that if they're a strong reader in middle school, it's something that they can enjoy. Remember, one's about war. The other one, again, about dance. But I think adults can totally enjoy this. You kidding me? I enjoyed them. And so next week I will present 2 others, and I hope you stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, your story matters, and maybe one day you will be featured in one of the best nonfiction books of the year. So until then, keep reading and keep safe. Thank you very much.